And here's another interesting chart. And these charts, I'm a huge fan of the Federal Reserve, the research sites, and the St. Louis Fed is actually one of the best sites that you can find if you're interested in looking at charts and trends over time. And they have data that in some cases goes back to the 1800s. Here's a chart that at least shows you the change in the personal savings rate. Over on the left-hand side, it starts in 1980, and those gray bars are recessions or downturns in the economy. And the fact of the matter is that it has been dropping over time, and we all know that. We've been told that, and people have said, well, don't worry about it. People are moving from pensions to 401ks, and is that really counted in the savings rate, etc., etc.? But the fact of the matter is that what has occurred in the last 2 to 3 years is the savings rate has taken a sharp and almost unprecedented upturn. And that's bad because by definition, when you're saving, you're not spending. And when you're not spending, you're not contributing to the GDP. So that ties in with the fact that the GDP has declined over the last couple of months, over the last couple of quarters rather, and that it's not coming back as aggressively as it has in past recoveries. We are in a recovery phase right now. You can see the gray bar ended in September of 2009. So it's always a shock to the system when the personal savings rate, that's consumers like you and me, decide to spend less and keep things in savings accounts or money markets. And if we move on then to the next slide, you can see one of the consequences of that is the fact that unemployment rises. There's really two factors there. Consumers aren't spending, so employers aren't making, and employers can't really foresee the future that accurately, and so by default they go for a pessimistic view and they hire less and hope to get more productivity out of the workers. And that has been the case up until about the middle of this year, and I'll show you a slide towards the end where you can see the productivity is actually dropping, and that's actually perversely a good sign. So one interesting slide that I found from going through the web was the impact that the housing refinancing, using the house as an ATM, had in the economy, impact of things like lower interest rate and easy credit, and did business and consumers really benefit from all of this activity? The fact is, you can see over time that GDP growth is limited. It doesn't take off dramatically in one direction or really the other, and if you decide to push the GDP forward by borrowing, you're really borrowing from future GDP if all said and done, and that inevitably leads to a kind of a slowdown in the future. So let's move on to the next slide. And the blue bars represent the actual reported GDP numbers by the Bureau of Economic Activity, I believe. And the red numbers are an estimate of what the GDP would have been had people not been using their houses as an ATM. And this goes through 2006, from 1996 to 2006. One of the little caveats I'd give you about this, it's kind of a dramatic picture. And it shows that the GDP would have been a lot lower in 2001, 2002 when the Fed decided to lower the interest rates to record kind of lows or multi-decade lows. It spurred a lot of refinancing and other such activities. But the fact is, I'm a little bit leery of this chart. It does illustrate something that's useful, but the fact is that had houses not been available to use as an ATM, to use the term that's in common parlance, people would have done other things and the GDP would not really have been as bad as those red bars indicate. But it does illustrate the fact that people, I think, were, and we know this, were using their houses as ATMs and pulling growth from the future into the present. And on the next chart, to me this is actually a very good sign, I think. And it's a good sign because it shows what's called the M2 money supply. Defining what money is kind of a little bit difficult to do. I mean, we all know that a dollar bill and cash and coinage is money, but demand deposits could be regarded as money because they're available to be spent. Money market funds might be regarded as money. And you've got the M1 supply, which is a rigid definition, the M2, which is less rigid. And you've got many M's after that, which become less and less rigid. But the fact of the matter is that the Fed used to monitor the M2 money supply quite diligently, and they used to mimic their interest rate strategy based on what the money supply looked at. And there has been a thing called quantitative easing, which is basically the activity of the Fed to pour lots of money into the economy. It's hard to know where that money's going because they've been pouring a lot of it in, but the money supply has been moving along at a nice steady clip. Maybe it accelerated towards the end of the recession, but it's a reasonably steady historic clip. I wonder, is this really helping people and companies just save and husband that money that's pouring into the economy? And then if we go on and look at GDP growth, can really see that what happened in 2008 to 2009 was very dramatic compared to 2001 to 2002. And it really was pretty dramatic compared to anything that we've seen since really the Great Depression. It slowed down significantly, but now we're back, and I'm not going to say we're back on track because the annualized rate is low single digits. It's about 2%, whereas normally it grows at the economy grows at about 3 to 4%. And that's a real number. When that number is reported by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, they calculate the growth of the economy and they actually subtract inflation away. So the number that they present is always inflation adjusted. Because people often ask me, oh, if you subtract inflation, we're going negative, but you never do that because it's already included. But the fact is that it's growing more slowly, and experts will always tell you that you need the economy to grow at 3 to 4% annually to kind of create the kind of jobs that are needed to replace the ones that have been lost. But there are signs that it's slowly going. And here's another chart from the Fed that really shows what happened in this recession. A very dramatic turndown in lending by banks. Despite the fact that everything has been done by the Fed to make it easier to get hold of money, the fact is that lending has slowed down. And of course, banks have been told to, you better improve your balance sheet as well. So that's why many people are getting called on lines of credit and things like this, or interest rates are shooting up because banks are really trying to cut down their liabilities to make their numbers look better. And there's quite a few charts. I call this chartorama, but I think they're very instructive, and I certainly like looking at them. That non-performing loans, so these are loans where the bank doesn't really expect to get paid back or that it's imperiled and in real danger. Now, frankly, this looks pretty bad that there was this enormous increase to 5% during the course of the recession. But if truth be told, they were probably really non-performing loans for many years before they were actually defined as such. It's still bad, and it still shows that there were probably very loose lending standards that have been severely tightened and suddenly tightened, and that doesn't help any economy anywhere when you do this suddenly, but that's what occurred. But the balance sheets of banks, you can see from this, and other institutions that lend really were really damaged over the last couple of years and are in need of repair. And then if we bounce on to the next slide, again, I'm just trying to give a big picture here of when you hear on the news or you read in the newspapers about a credit crunch, is it really true or what does it mean? And the fact is in this chart, so you can see really that in the top line, which is the blue line, which shows credit card, which is where a lot of people get their discretionary credit from. It grew from 1999 up until 2000, 2001, 2003. And then it took a sharp dive once the recession hit in 2008, and we're now back to levels that haven't been seen since, well, for the last 10 years. Auto loans, you can see, are in green, and that's kind of a more gentle increase, but also a more gentle decline. But you can see student loans have shot up. That's the red line, and they've certainly shot up since 2008 to 2010. That shouldn't be surprising. I had a good friend of mine, CEO of a technology company. When he interviewed people and they said they wanted to go for an MBA, he used to say, don't bother, school is for recessions. And it turns out he must be right because there's certainly been a bit of a spike in student loans. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see delinquencies. Again, this is a really sad picture. This is slide 24. But the fact is that if you look at this image, you can see that mortgage, which is that kind of mustard yellow color, mortgages are the ones that are causing the problems. They're certainly increased quite dramatically over the last couple of quarters. But also delinquency on student loans and to some extent delinquency on credit cards as well. Actually, everything. And then if you look at the number of consumers that are facing foreclosure or bankruptcies, the red shows bankruptcies, the red bar, and the bluish green bar shows foreclosures. Now, you can see that it dropped dramatically back in 2005, 2006, and that's when the law changed. So bankruptcy was harder to do. But it has been on the increase, and it always is on the increase when there's a recession. And then if we look at the next slide, you can see that debt, which is essential, debt in the economy, and I know we don't like to take on too much of it, and NEIC/Better Investing people certainly don't, but debt has always been on the increase, and again, slowed down when the Great Recession started, and that means there's less money in circulation, fewer things that can be bought and sold, and the GDP takes a hit as a result. Kind of all ties in together. But debt is on the decline. We said savings were up, debt was down. The New York Fed produces evidence to demonstrate that, and it has real tangible consequences on the overall economy. But there are good signs. Productivity is declining, and that is actually a good sign. Productivity normally increases during a recession. In this recession particularly, people we're told, are very scared about their jobs. They work harder. Productivity increases, and productivity certainly increased dramatically during this Great Recession. But the fact is that now it's on the decline. And I guess it's on the decline because people are kind of tapped out. And we're probably getting to the point where firms have to decide whether or not they want to face a downturn in productivity or whether they have to hire people to keep things improving. Of course, the other side is that there could be a downturn in productivity because there are fewer demands from consumers to buy products or services that the company's offering. But there's really no sign that that's happening because GDP is growing. Consumer spending is growing again, but as we showed earlier, discretionary spending is still really sluggish. And the hiring numbers have been reasonably good, and certainly first-time unemployment claims have been improving over the last number of weeks and months. But the fact is that we took a big body blow to the economy, and this kind of thing takes time to recover. For us, for long-term investors like us, sad to say, it's a good thing. I mean, I would expect the stock market actually to languish during this recovery period and prices to bounce around the place but not do anything dramatic like we've seen in the past, and unless they have some brand new product or service that's pretty dramatic in and of itself. But I would say there's bound to be lots of buying activities and lots of potential to accumulate in your portfolio for the next couple of years until we get back on track. And this recession is a little bit different too, in that it's a multi-nation event. Events that happen in China and Europe today more greatly impact the US than has occurred in the past. And so we have to kind of claw our way out of this together. And getting people to work together is tough enough, but getting people from different cultures and countries to work together is even tougher. And I know Europe has been moving in one direction with its quantitative easing. The US is going in the other, but there is light at the end of this tunnel, and we are coming out of it slower than most people would hope, but we are moving out. And the interesting thing I would predict is that I think there's probably going to be a permanent generational change in the behavior of consumers, particularly those that have been caught in the mortgage downturn. I think higher savings is going to be here for a while. That's good because there'll be higher investment as well. But for the next couple of years, I'm perversely looking forward to buying stock at what I would say lower prices than should be, because the economy is going to be slow. So with that, I'll skip the next chart and just move on to our producer. I guess hand it over to Mark.
Well, we'll go ahead and continue on from there. I just wanted to take a moment. First of all, let me just kind of acknowledge, for those of you that are routine or regular visitors to the Manifest Forum, one of our contributors there is Dan Hess. And Dan Hess has been posting a number of pieces of evidence on how he believes. And again, when people like Hugh McManus and Dan Hess tell me, this time I think it's different, and then show me some reasons for thinking it's different, I certainly think it's worth taking the time to digest that sort of stuff. So now we'll just take a little bit of a transition to the next part of the program. One of the things I wanted to do here this morning is just reach out and say thank you to what has become our producer, Dan Hornick. Dan is from Wisconsin, and he's been recording these sessions, and we'll be making them available probably at our Facebook page and through YouTube. And I just wanted to say thanks. Dan is simply volunteering, and one day he said, why don't I just do this? And